Our top focus on today's show, Fineprint, is on Sudan. The death toll over 3 days of deadly clashes in Sudan has crossed the 100 mark. Hopes for a peaceful transition from autocratic to civilian rule slowly disappear in front of millions in the country. Sudan's foreign ministry announced that the country's army chief has ordered the dissolution of the RSF, the Rapid Support Force. It has branded it as a rebellious group amid fighting across the country. Fighting between the army and the paramilitary forces led by their general has entered its third day. Monday morning for the Sudanese was overwhelmed by explosions, with some local outlets reporting airstrikes in the capital Khartoum. The violence first erupted on Saturday morning and came after weeks of a power struggle between the two generals. Sudan's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his deputy Mohammed Hamdan Daglo seized power in 2021. Daglo, also known as Hemeti, commands the powerful paramilitary group Rapid Support Forces, known as the RSF. Over 3 days of intense conflict, capital Khartoum, along with other major Sudanese cities, have seen airstrikes, tanks on the streets, artillery fire and heavy gunfire in crowded neighborhoods. Witnesses say battles continued around Khartoum overnight and became especially intense after morning prayers. In the middle of this greedy power struggle are the Sudanese people. The violence has forced terrified civilians to shelter in their homes. There are fears of a prolonged conflict that could plunge the country into deeper chaos.
I have 3 boys, teenagers, and my husband also ventured out yesterday to get some medicine for himself during what was supposed to be the ceasefire, but apparently that ceasefire wasn't really effective because there was still gunfire and there were still clashes during that time, the declared ceasefire.
Those on ground have reported power cuts, water scarcity, as well as shortages of fuel, food and medical care.
The main challenge I saw is water actually. People are going around everywhere, supermarket, around the streets to get water, but nobody is finding water.
The United Nations World Food Programme has suspended operations in the country after 3 of its employees were killed in the Western Darfur region. The move will cause further chaos in the country, where 1/3 of the population, which is nearly 45 million people, who are in need of food aid. Stunned by the violence, African, Western and Arab countries have called for resolutions through peace talks. The Arab League, of which Sudan is a member, appealed to both parties to stop the bloodshed.
There is a shared deep concern about the fighting, the violence that's going on in Sudan, the threat that poses to civilians, that it poses to the Sudanese nation, and potentially poses even to the region.
Future lies in the hands of the generals who are engaged in this fight, and we call upon them to put peace first, to bring an end to the fighting, to get back to negotiations. That's what the people of Sudan want, that's what the people of Sudan deserve, and we will continue to seek ways to support that road back to peace.
The clashes come as Sudan was slowly crawling back to the path of democracy. It recently emerged from international isolation. The US had lifted its designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. There was international aid coming in. Even Russia had started to establish its footprint in the geostrategically important country. Sudan was supposed to usher in a momentous new era this month, a return to civilian rule. The army had promised to hand over power last week, but the transition depended on the 2 military leaders, whose rivalries derailed all possible plans for Sudan. Africa's 3rd largest country has once again fallen into a chaotic spiral. For more on the story, we are being joined by Bastian Massa from Addis Ababa. Massa is a journalist focusing on Sudan. Welcome to the broadcast, Massa.
Thanks, Mr. Chanana, for inviting me.
Bashir, the violence has continued into the third day. What kind of impact can this have on Africa as a whole? Are there chances of it spreading to other nations if it's not curtailed?
First, we can state that a near-term ceasefire seems unlikely in the next days. Like, fightings are still ongoing, as you say clearly in your introduction, both in and out the capital. And both parties has been like fighting on the ground, but also fighting verbally with quite strong stance. And Hemeti qualified like Burhan of dog, and that he should die like a dog. So the climate is not really in negotiation. But still, some attempts for mediations initiative are ongoing. And we can quote a lot of initiative from South Sudan and Egypt, from African Union, and from a pool of regional East African countries. Maybe a little bit too much mediation. And also African Union stated that they wanted to fly as soon as possible to Sudan to ease the tension. But as you said, the airport is closed and fighting are still ongoing in this area. And as you mentioned also, yesterday a humanitarian corridor has been implemented for 4 hours, pushed by a UN Security Council. But even these 4 hours of humanitarian corridors haven't been respected by both sides. So a mediation is possible in Sudan, but it has to be a strong mediation pushed by international actors and not just diplomatic calls from one country or another one.
Right.
Now your question was more about the risk of regionalization of the conflict.
Yes.
It's true, even if the clashes are like located only in Sudan and between Sudanese forces, we can see some pattern, like Egypt could be willing to intervene because Egypt is a long-term ally of al-Burhan. And if Egypt intervenes, on the other side, Ethiopia could be willing to balance this growing influence of Egypt in the region by supporting Hemeti. And Eritrea has already announced its support for Hemeti. So until now, nobody has clearly been involved, no other country has clearly been involved in Sudan, but it can happen.
So the condition, I mean, it can spiral into a larger conflict, spiraling into other countries of Africa. Bashir, I also want to ask from you, what's the way forward for Sudan? Is there any scope of these two forces coexisting as earlier in Sudan?
I don't think so, because we have seen that these two forces are coexisting since the revolution, and it has been painful for both, because both forces are quite they have the same power. The RSF, which is a militia, it's 100,000 men, and almost as many as in the army. So, and both leaders, they wanted to get the power, and they have like different interests and different agendas. So since the beginning, and maybe more since the coup, which happened like in 25th of October 2021,
yes.
Everybody knew in Sudan that it was not sustainable, this coexisting power leadership between Hemeti and Burhan. Right. The question was to know when the clash would happen. And the tensions increased recently since December, when a framework agreement was signed between Hemeti, Burhan, and civilian political forces to start a new transition and to nominate a new civilian government. And the army and the RSF were fighting over the question of integration of these militiamen within the army. And in the recent weeks, we could notice both men bringing new troops within the capitals. And most of the people were fearing that clash would happen soon.
So these clashes were inevitable, right from the first time when they came together in 2021 in the coup. Now, Bashir, if I were to just expand it a little beyond Africa, what are the geopolitical impacts of the current situation in Sudan? It is a strategically important place for a lot of nations across the world. If you can shed some light on that.
It's true, it has been stated by many people that a lot of countries were involved in Sudan or had interest in Sudan. And most of the time, different interests. like, for example, Russia has interest in gold mining, and with its private military company Wagner, trying to create a military base on the Red Sea and connect maybe Mali, Central African Republic, where Wagner is present. Also, like for the Western countries, it has been a question of finding stability in Sudan. For Europe, for example, the important question was migration, and a stable Sudan can help to prevent important migration to Libya. So, and on the other side, China is also investing some money in Sudan, and Gulf countries also are trying to find to expand their influence in the region. So all of these countries, they have different interests, but I think at this time, none of them has interest in a failing Sudan.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for all those updates, Bastian, and thank you for joining in.